We've all seen it. The plastic bottles littering our shorelines and the microplastics swirling around in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And we want to do something about it. And the most obvious solution to do that is to stop using plastic. And this solution has become pretty widespread simply because it's tangible, it's easy to explain, and it's easy to understand. It's even been turned into a marketing pitch as an easy problem to buy ourselves out of. But the reality is that every single thing we purchase creates an environmental footprint before it even makes it to us. There's a lot more to consider than just the recyclability alone, but that has been the main focus of the zero waste movement over the years. Avoid plastic, choose glass. It's that simple. But what if I told you that if we consider the entire environmental footprint of a product, plastic, specifically flexible packaging, often comes out as the most sustainable option? According to the English Environment Agency, if we compare the amount of resources and emissions used to create a single-use plastic, paper, and reusable cotton bag, the single-use plastic bag has the smallest environmental footprint. This is because 60% of the given bag's environmental footprint comes from the extraction of the raw materials. Then you follow that with 25% for production, 10% for transportation, and only 5% of those bags' entire life cycle analysis environmental footprint comes from its end of life, aka its recyclability, its waste, etc. This is an area I am really interested in considering the entire environmental footprint of anything aside from just its end of life cycle. That's why I always talk about this lifestyle technique that I use called eco-minimalism, because every single thing we buy has an environmental footprint before it makes it to us. And according to the studies, that is a larger environmental footprint than being concerned only in the packaging and how it will be wasted. I also started to become really interested in how different types of packaging can help the environment rather than only focusing on their recyclability. My interest peaked in how non-recyclable packaging could possibly be more sustainable than packaging that is recyclable. I used to have a podcast for a short period of time a while back where I actually had the opportunity to talk to many CEOs of some of my absolute favorite sustainable brands. But my absolute favorite episode I was able to do by far was this episode with Carlos from Inval, where he talked about plastic aluminum laminates and flexible packaging and how they're actually more sustainable in every single way other than their recyclability.
So, for example, if you had a truck carrying juice in plastic bottles, that truck has around 60% of juice and 40% of packaging. So the fuel that truck is burning is transporting 40% of packaging. If you have exactly the same truck, but transporting that same juice in pouches, that truck is transporting 95% of product and 5% of packaging. So the efficiency of the transportation and therefore the burning of the fuel that we're doing in the truck is way better if you are transporting these things in flexible packaging. Using flexible packaging is not for free. We're actually doing it for good reasons, for good environmental reasons. What really annoys me is that we forget sometimes that perspective and we concentrate only in the recyclability side of things. And yes, some of these flexibles are not recyclable. Companies like Enval are trying to do something to turn them into something recyclable because guess what? They are actually very good from an environmental point of view, even if they are not recyclable. And the fact that they end up in the oceans have nothing to do with the fact that they are not recyclable. A lot of things that are recyclable end up in the oceans anyway. That's a problem of us littering. That's a problem of the terrible waste handling system that we have, even in the Western world, let alone in developing countries. And that has, again, very little to do with the packaging itself. Plastics don't end up in the ocean because they like a suntan. They don't go to the ocean because they like surfing. Plastics end up in the ocean because we litter and we let them go to the oceans by gravity. Okay. And if it was not plastic, it would be something else. We really need to pay attention to the whole supply chain situation, not only from a recyclability point of view, but from a what other resources this kind of packaging are saving on one side, and why do they go to the ocean in the first place, and what responsibility the waste handling sector has in order to provide that, and obviously what we consumers have about that, and not throwing stuff in the street because it will end up in the canal, will end up in the river, will end up in the ocean.
This episode really got me thinking, because up until that point, everything I had heard from the zero waste movement was glass good, mixed material, flexible packaging bad, because of our current recycling system. The thought process of the zero waste movement back in 2017 was, we already have recycling systems for XYZ materials, right? We were pushing for more aluminum because we already had the ability to recycle that efficiently. But instead of pushing brands to package all of these different types of goods in the small amount of types of materials that we already had recycling for, we could have instead have been advocating that we fund and provide infrastructure for new types of recycling for the materials that are better for the environment and every single other sustainability factor. So that conversation got me thinking about a few things. Number one, my expectation for brands to only produce items and packaging that have already an established recycling stream is incredibly limiting and can have other adverse effects on the overall environmental footprint of said item. In essence, expecting any new brand to only package their goods in materials that already have a recycling system would mean that we would likely have a lot less goods, or goods that are going bad, or goods that are much more expensive, etc. Number two, glass packaging and even other forms of single material packaging require a lot more fuel to ship due to their weight and the way it has to be packed to prevent it from breaking. Number three, glass does not have the same ability to keep some products as fresh as a flexible packaging would. This would lead to a lot more food being wasted. We also have to calculate the environmental footprint of lost product, of wasted product, into what types of materials we are using. Shelf life is incredibly important to making sure that the resources that go into making that food are actually able to be utilized. With other types of single material packaging, it's just simply not as good as the mixed material. Number four, glass is breakable, and broken glass is often not accepted by recyclers. Flexible packaging results in less loss due to breakage and less liability for injury for employees all across the supply chain. Number five, recycling is a business, and there's a lot of costs associated with developing a recycling system, and those who create the recycling system need financial assistance to get started from our government. But more importantly, the businesses that create this flexible packaging should have some part in funding the development of the recycling method for said packaging. And number six, the environmental footprint of creating flexible packaging requires less water and less energy than many other forms of packaging that we currently think of as the more sustainable option. That podcast episode and all of these facts combined really set off a light bulb in my head. This is when I started to shift my thoughts on zero waste overall. I started advocating as much as I could to focus on the overall footprint of a product as opposed to just its packaging waste. I realized that a circular economy and an economy where you can bring your own materials to fill it with the things that you need is the most sustainable option, but I also realized that is not an option for the majority of people, at least in the US. This is why simply advocating for zero waste or plastic-free living is not black and white. This is very much a gray area. Flexible packaging is superior for the environment in every single way other than its recyclability. And as I've shown, the recyclability is a rather small part of the entire environmental footprint. As the previously mentioned study shows, the end of a product's life cycle only contributes to about 5% of the product's overall environmental impact. And since there are also studies that show that for every pound of trash we produce, there are an additional 7 pounds produced behind the scenes, I think this is why individual action is attuned to pouring a bucket of water on a bonfire. It does help, but it won't stop the fire from burning. I'll leave the link to the entire conversation I had with Carlos from Invol in the description. But in essence, the real solution here is funding new recycling methods for these types of packaging that are better for the planet. But how the heck do we do that? How can you and I help solve this problem in a way that seems more efficient and more sustainable? I've got some tips for you. If you are feeling particularly passionate about this issue, get involved in your local activist groups and communities. This is where you could potentially influence funding and infrastructure for new recycling systems in your community. For example, pushing your rep to provide assistance in getting your community a flexible packaging recycling facility would be the perfect place to start. Write to brands. I'll leave my guide linked in the description, but as much as I say it, I truly believe that by writing brands and telling them why we want to see what we want to see, they don't hear from us, they're not incentivized to do so. And I've also made this video that makes it very simple for you to send it to them so that they can watch it and understand why they need to be helping fund the recycling systems for the waste that they are producing. Do your best with the options that are currently available to us and don't get too caught up in your individual actions. Our individual actions are meant to show people above us, politicians and corporation owners, what we want to see more and less of, which is important, but you producing a little bit of waste is not the overall issue. It is them. We are victims of the system. We are not to blame, so we have to operate within that capacity. Pointing out and criticizing individuals for not being perfect when you yourself are not either will only push people away from the movement, and without collective action, nothing is going to change. So instead of focusing on your friends and family and how to change their minds, focus on the people at the top who can actually make the biggest difference that will trickle down. This video is brought to you by the Flexible Packaging Association. I hope you really enjoyed it. I know that this was something that really opened my eyes and really changed how I thought about environmentalism, and also really changed my idea of how I could live more sustainably and took some of the guilt off of me, because I can only do as much as the society I live in allows me to. So let me know if you learned something new. Let me know what kind of videos like this you want to see next. And remember, until next time, you cannot do all the good that the world needs, but the world needs all the good that you can do. Bye guys.